Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to the first in a three-part webinar series for the Caribbean Vocational Qualification Examination. My name is Linda Stewart Doman, and I will be your facilitator for this morning. Just to let you know that under the CARICOM Heads of Government Agreement in 2008, the Caribbean Examinations Council was mandated to facilitate the issuing of the Caribbean vocational qualification within our secondary schools across the region. In this endeavor, the Caribbean vocational qualification seeks to, 1, facilitate the free movement of skilled certified workers within the Caribbean single market economy. 2, to develop in students the attributes of the ideal Caribbean worker. 3, to enhance the profile and attractiveness of CARICOM labor force. And 4, to harmonize the TVET systems across the region. So, what does this framework entail? Within this framework, schools participate through the offering of programs using the approved regional occupational standards. And these programs are delivered using the competency-based education, training, and assessment methodologies. Candidates who are desirous of being recognized through certification are expected to demonstrate competence in all the mandatory, or what we call core areas, units specified within the regional occupational standards. Also, the regional occupational standards are approved by CARICOM through a process led by the Caribbean Association of National Training Authorities. And so, what is CXC's role? CXC is committed to providing the schools within the territories that we serve with risk management strategies, clear lines for governance and accountability, suggestions for workable organizational structures, assessment and awarding service that is fit for purpose, a quality customer experience, and the strategies for promoting diversity and inclusion into the design and development of programs and the culture of continuous improvement. In a matter of weeks, COVID-19 has changed our very lives. It has changed the sphere of work. It has changed the way we do business. It has changed the way we conduct everyday living. Education and training has not been exempted. And so we've had 60% of education in the world impacted. And almost all of our education system in the Caribbean have seen this impact and the repercussive effects of COVID-19. We have had to employ strategies, and those strategies include offering remote learning, online learning, asynchronous and synchronous learning. We have had to employ ways of reaching and teaching and for learning to take place. We at the Caribbean Examinations Council have realized that and have been responsive to the needs of our stakeholders and would have been looking at modified approaches to our examinations of our products and services. CVQ, as I would have said earlier in my introduction, CXC was mandated to facilitate same in 2008. And we would have engaged in product implementation through pre-readiness audits, through training and assessment audits, in training audits, and what we call final certification audit to enable certification. This would have changed the way we would have administrated, and as well as how we would have facilitated the training and assessment audits, seeing that it would be within the period that COVID would have struck, and we would have to look at other ways of doing this training and assessment audit. The purpose of the 3-day webinars is for us to say to you that we care and we understand all that is happening. And so we are going to go straight into actually telling you about one, the portfolio development process. It's a reminder, again, of the portfolio development process. 2, to outline to you the CXC's certification approach for 2020, which will be done tomorrow. And 3, to have our students engaged on day 3 for CVQ portfolio development tips. But before I go straight into the presentation, which the first of which is the portfolio development process, the CXC approach, let me ask the senior manager, Jodine Williams, to just give just a warm welcome or greeting before we go straight into our actual presentation for the day. Ms. Williams?
Morning, colleagues. Thanks, Linda. It is good to have you engaging with us this morning. So on behalf of the Caribbean Examinations Council, just want to welcome you to this session. We hope that it will be an engaging session for all of us. We will get a better context of what's happening within your territories. And as we seek to serve you, that we would have been able to engage you around the strategy we have designed. Linda will be facilitating the session for the next 3 days. And we are here to support you. Just also want to recognize the presence of our Director of Operations, Mrs. Nicole Manning, and our colleagues from our office in Barbados, Michelle and Tanya, who are also in the session supporting us. And of course, Team SCD, you would have heard from our instructional designer earlier, but we also have other members of the team with us this morning as well. So you will see responses coming from perhaps Debbie Ann Hall, as well as Jodine Williams, Nicole Manning, Tanya Motley, and Michelle McCaffrey. That is the CXC team, so you will be able to engage directly with us. Have a good session. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Jodine. And so you've just heard from Ms. Jodine Williams, who is our Senior Manager, Syllabus and Curriculum Development. Now, as you would have heard, it being repeated, it's the first of a 3-day webinar series. The first of which will be the portfolio development process, which is happening now. The next will be tomorrow, the CXC certification approach. And that's for all stakeholders except the students, the Ministry of Education, the NTA, the principals, the assessors, the local registrars. And then we have day 3, which will have the portfolio development tips. We encourage you to get your students to be a part of this activity. We'll have students, the candidates for this year, the prospective candidates, students who are desirous of pursuing CVQ programs. And so we want all our stakeholders to be involved. And so we have specific target groups over the 3 days. With that said, and without further ado, let me get to the meat of the matter, which is the CVQ portfolio development process, the CXC approach. We know that you would have been engaged in the implementation, the preparation, the execution of portfolios. We know that across the territories, you have different mechanisms, you have employed different strategies, you have established procedures in how you manage this process, how you execute this process, how you control this process. However, it is important for us at this time that we go through this document, yes, we would have had territory presentations, territory training, product implementation, activities relating to portfolio development. But in this particular instance, we found that it was crucial and absolutely critical for us to go through the portfolio development process. And that is using the CXC's approach. Now, the webinar for today will look at an overview of the portfolio development process, and how we can access CVQ resources. We will also be looking at some activities. I realized that Miss Maraj raised her hand. I'm going to ask, I don't know, if there are any questions, that we raise them after the session in terms of the presentation would have been completed, but I'm not sure, Ms. Maharaj, why you've raised your hand. Okay, we'll proceed. So we'll be looking at the overview of the portfolio in CVQ assessment. And I want to share with you a quote that I want to ask you to reflect on this quote as we go through this presentation. And it is, the magic of portfolios lies not in the portfolios themselves, but in the process used in creating them and the school culture in which documented learning is valued. Colleagues, I want you to reflect on this statement as we go through the presentation. The magic of portfolios, according to Danielson and DeBrute in 1997, speaks to, lies not into the portfolios themselves. So it's not just the nice, creative end product. It's not the final model. It's not just the finished, it's not the prototype, but it is in the process. So it is more, has to do with the process, what went into the planning, what went into the execution. How did we enable the steps? How did we arrive at the final product? So it's in the process used in creating them and the school culture in which documented learning is valued. So what is a portfolio? Portfolio is an organized, convenient means of collecting and presenting evidence which records, verifies, but not only that, also confirms a candidate's competence when measured against work required for each unit in the occupational standards. In the Caribbean vocational qualification, as is established, we have two types of portfolios that are required. We have one, the candidate's portfolio, and two, the teacher's portfolio. For the candidate portfolio, it is a collection of artifacts used to show effort, progress, products, and achievements. This is where we ask students to identify problems, to practice until they are deemed competent, if they are not yet competent, to reflect on their learning journey, to collaborate with their peers, to respond to feedback. They should be on a path of continuous improvement. Also, we're looking at employability skills for them to meet established deadlines. So we have an agreement. It's an agreement between facilitator, or in this case would have been our assessor, and the assessor and the student who becomes the candidate. And it's an agreement based on the learning path. We call it the training, delivery, and assessment plan. You communicate that plan, and it's an agreed schedule as to when learning will take place, in terms of what will be facilitated, what will be assessed. It's an agreement. And so it's about meeting deadlines based on the dates that are specified for a period of facilitation and the timeline for assessment. Use it to identify problems. Usually the tasks or activities that are carried out, the case studies, some of the written work, such as projects, and also other activities, research, would relate to how they identify problems, how they correct issues relating to the task, relating to the competency standards. And I just want you colleagues to tell me from what you know, you can write in the chat as well. What do you think are some of the components in a candidate's portfolio? What do you think? We should have a Slido activity coming up, but you can also, if you are not seeing that Slido coming up, you can speak to what are some of the components or inclusions that should be in the candidate's portfolio. I'm giving you 5 minutes to just write. So the components of a candidate portfolio, you can just write, and I will have a look at what it is that you have written. So 5 minutes. I see reflections. Yes, reflections must be included. Keep them coming, colleagues. What are the components of the candidate portfolio? You need to have evidence. Yes. Introductions, very important. Objectives, yes. Skills. Yes, we want to see skills, but in what way are we looking for skills, and how do we get the evidence, and what sort of evidence are we looking at? So we're talking about pictorial, or what we call photographic evidence. We talk about the assessment pieces. Yes, pictures to showcase skills, and this is skills. A lot of times we speak about pictures, colleagues, the work samples of the students. And when we speak about pictures, we're not talking about students not engaged in the activities, but they should be engaged in activities that will produce or enable performance outcomes. Yes, cover page, reflections, the practical activities, videos, assessment samples. I see work samples, case studies. Yes, so we need to look at all the evidence, but what sort of evidence will be required? We need to also allow them to share with us self and peer assessments, which are critical. They are part of the learning process, a part of the learning journey. So they're evaluating self, and it's what we call a part of what we call metacognitive strategies used in education, used in assessment. And it's assessment as learning for self and peer assessments. Yes, we look at authentic assessments, and now we're seeing this term that is being widely used in TVET now. We talk about live work. So we see them doing live work. We see them doing real life work. That's what we're seeing coming up now. So it's not just the authentic, but we used to talk about the authentic assessments and so on. And we talk about formative and continuous. We're seeing live, and we're talking about simulated work. Now we're talking also about real work and live work. So very good, colleagues. And you spoke about observation checklist. I've seen tangible evidence will be required, whether it's live work or digital, to depict the work that was done. Very good, colleagues. So you have a basic understanding of what it is that would be required. And the picture should tell us stories, not just pictures, as I told you, colleagues. The pictures must tell a story. The pictures must show you, it should be giving you information as if you were there. You're living vicariously through the pictures, through the activities that would have happened during that time. So colleagues, thank you very much for that activity. So you do understand that it is a collection of artifacts used to show effort, progress, products, and achievements. Now, did you know that CVQ requires you to have a teacher's portfolio? You can answer in the chat. Did you know that CVQ requires all teachers who are trained assessors to have a teacher's portfolio? And we are going to be doing an activity shortly, colleagues, as to what should be included in this portfolio. Now, a teacher's portfolio is a collection again of artifacts used to deliver program, monitor program, assess students, and also to determine their competence. Now, the teacher who is the assessor is also an assessor. So we have the teachers, first of all, for CVQ must be trained assessors. So the teacher is a coach. The teacher acts as coach and motivator, always trying to guide. The teacher tries to mentor, tries to motivate. The teacher is the facilitator. The teacher is the guide on the side, is not the sage on stage, because we are saying that the students are coming with their own experiences. You know, we talk about Vygotsky, we talk about the zone of proximal development and scaffolding. We're saying that they come with their experience and we build on that experience. So as assessors, we build on that experience that the students who are or candidates now become CVQ candidates. They build on that experience. They come with some sort of knowledge and they come with attitude. They have formed their own mental appreciation of the world of work, of the society as how they see it, from their own socialization, for their own adaptation. And so we try to see how best we can help them in a learning process to access competency-based education and for them to be successful, to be competent. And by successful, we mean that they are deemed competent. We said assessor, and you know that there are courses or qualifications that would enable that. You have to become a trained assessor, and that is facilitated through the national training authorities, which we have in some territories. They're known as TVET councils or national training agencies. They also provide feedback, which is critical. And when we go through the processes, you'll see how critical that is. So I don't know if we can do the Slido activity, we could try that. And if not, we could go straight that into using your chat to tell me what, based on what was just said, what is included. Yes.
We can do the Slido activity now.
Okay, lovely. So we're going to go into our Slido activity now. Give me examples of what could be included now in the artifacts. When we talk about artifacts, what are we talking about? So I'll give you some time to respond, colleagues. Tell me what is it should be in your teacher portfolio. So even if you did not know it, you know it now, that teachers who are assessors really should. Lesson plans. I see Joan say lesson plans, and Martha, lesson plans. Anyone using the Slido? Mark schemes. Evaluation, yes, very important. Anything else, colleagues? Answer sheets, because we should also have what? Not just the questions or the actual work that we're given to that will be given to the students, no, but we should have something similar to what the table of specification at least, and to have our mark schemes in place. We need to do our own self-reflection. Did you know that? Colleagues, did you know that as teachers, as assessors, we need to also reflect on the process? Samples of worksheets. And we're not only talking about worksheets, relating to just the written or the oral, but also the practical, because it's very important that we see some observation of practice. Anything else, colleagues, that you can think of? And when we go through, you'll see, yes, the teachers, you can include that. So even if you did not know, I see someone say they did not know that they could include teacher reflections. Yes, colleagues, it's a part of your own continuous improvement, and you can do that with each. Did you know that you can do it with each group that you get? Yes, you can do it. Approvals for field trips. Yes, very important. We talk about industry exposure, and I'm going to tell you some more about that. The student scores, very important. How does that translate now into whether the student's competency status, whether they're competent or not yet competent? So we can do that. And while we're having this session, colleagues, we can see this engagement as a community of practice. Because as I see persons writing to say they didn't know about the reflections and this is something they can do. Yes, budget for your program. What about your tools and requisition? How about your tools and requisition items? Those can be copied. Yes, we know that bursars may maintain it depending on the territory that you're from. But did you know that you can keep it? Sometimes the Ministry of Education has the information, but did you know that you can maintain copies? How about the maintenance of your equipment and your tools? Yes, very important. What about the fire drill that was done? You can maintain that evidence. What about you did an evacuation drill? There was an inspection of your lab. Very important, colleagues. Those can go into your teacher portfolio. And I saw someone writing about the TDAPs. Yes. Any presentation that you would have done, you can include that. You can actually organize your portfolio based on sections. And so it is very important, colleagues, that you understand that the portfolio, first we monitor, we assess, but did you know that your qualifications could be a part of the teacher portfolio? Your qualifications, yes. If you're an assessor, you know that the audit asks for just to look at those qualifications. Yes. If you have upgraded, if you have done any upskilling in recent time, you put that information. If you're a first aider, you put that information. If you've completed certain, say, a particular degree, or you're continuing, or you got some recommendation or accommodation, yes, testimonials, you can include that. You can include your resume and your personal statement. So those are areas that you can look at, colleagues, in the compilation of your teacher portfolio. Now, just to let you know that we're covering this aspect because we want you to be clear, because the next set of slides that you will be seeing from here on will be that of the focusing on the candidate's portfolio. So just bear in mind, before we leave this slide, teacher portfolio is a collection of artifacts used to deliver the program, to monitor the program, to assess the students, and to determine competence. And we have gone through that already. I need for you to also understand that you can include your general information, introduction, your personal statements, your resumes. You can look at your actual qualifications, what makes you qualified to be teaching this august set of students in this particular times, because you're not only a teacher, you have been trained as in See Better, and you're able, that's competency-based education, training, and assessment. And so you are equipped to deliver. For some of you, you're internal verifiers. Some persons have been trained as external verifiers. Very critical that you can include that information in your portfolio. So having said that, we now move to the focus, as I indicated to you, which will be on the portfolio development process as it relates to the candidate, because you're the enablers of the process, colleagues, because you are the ones who are involved in this execution, in the planning, the preparation, and having the final documents, we're saying we want you to understand this process clearly. And I'm happy that I can see persons saying, oh, they didn't know this. This is something that they're going to be doing. I am happy to note, colleagues, that, and that is one of the reasons we want to have this session. And that is why we have extended the invite to all territories that we serve. All territories, because we want you to understand and to be clear as to the process. The process is critical moving forward. Now, the candidate portfolio. So we have identified and defined what is candidate portfolio. We have defined the teacher's portfolio. We're going into granular now as to what is expected of teachers, what the candidate portfolio should look like. All right? So a CVQ portfolio incorporates a variety of evidence that is benchmarked against the relevant unit or units of competency and indicate continuous and consistent performance of work activities according to workplace, enterprise, or industry standards. So the CVQ portfolio is it's what we call progression for the students. It maps their progress. And as I indicated to you, it is an agreement between assessor and candidate as to this is where I am, this is where I need to go. It is looking at the regional occupational standards, understanding it, understanding the schedule for facilitation, the schedule for assessment, looking at the clusters of units or individual units that will form a part of the portfolio, looking at the activities that will be required for that to take place or for it to become a reality, looking at the timeline or duration of the completion of the portfolio, looking at when we should be at least quarter way, or what we call 25% of training and assessment taking place, to 50%, to 75%, to 100%, to the point where the external verifier would have confirmed the judgment of competence for these students, for these candidates. And so the CVQ portfolio, again, colleagues, it incorporates a variety of evidence that is benchmarked against relevant units of competency and indicates continuous and consistent performance. Now, the role of the assessor. What is the role of the assessor? Because if we're talking about the role of the assessor, then we need to understand the role of the learner. Now, the role of the assessor provides guidelines for portfolio development, communicates the assessment plan or schedule. You must communicate, as I told you. And if you notice, before I even came to this slide, I kept saying communication, communication, communication. And in communicating, you're providing the guidelines as well for the portfolio development. Implement the assessment plan, your rubric, your instruction sheets, your projects, research, case studies, reflections, those are included. And we spoke about the teacher portfolio. Mark, scores, grades, and provides feedback. Guides learners in the collection, selection, organization, and presentation of evidence for each set of units. That's your role. You see how critical and how important your role is? Collection, selection, organization, and presentation of evidence for each set of units or unit. The role of the assessor continues. Monitors and documents learners' progress, authenticates evidence. And you know, we're going to be touching a bit on the authentication when we reach to the sections as we look at the process. So as we go through the process and navigate the processes, we're going to be looking at how we authenticate evidence. We encourage reflection. So you should be encouraging reflection, colleagues, for either a cluster of units or individual units, depending on what you see best. And if you find that you have students who have a difficulty in actually doing reflections, you can actually start the reflection sheet for them. You can say, how was this activity? I did this because this was helpful because what were the challenges experienced? You can help them as well, because some of them are quick to write. And we call that journaling now, or reflection. But we use the terminology that we use is reflection, but they're actually journaling. What they're journaling is their process, is the process in arriving from plan, process to product. What were the challenges? You know, how did they manage here? Did they do better than the last time, or what will they be improving on? Now, including self and peer evaluations in the assessment process. Again, I spoke to you about the metacognitive strategies using assessment, where this is assessment as learning, where they're involved in their own learning. They take responsibility and are more self-directed in the process. And so they will find ways. You would provide those templates or already prescribed document sheets that they can use to rate themselves, to allow their peers to rate them, and then you do the rating. Now, the role of the learner. What is their role? Because like I said, it's an agreement. The learner participates in the guidance session regarding portfolio development. They cannot be absent. They cannot be absent. They cannot be absent. They must be present. They must participate. They must be engaged in the process. Secures a copy of the qualification plan and the assessment plan schedule. Demonstrate competence based on units. Follows the instructions of the assessor. Seek assistance where necessary. And we need to be providing that guidance, colleagues. We need to be providing that support. We need to engage our learners. We shouldn't see the portfolios as just being laborious and intensive. But we need to see this evidence collection as being exciting, as a journey that you share with the candidates as they try to achieve this. As I said, to facilitate the movement of skilled certified workers. We want them to become skilled and certified workers. We want them to develop the attributes of the ideal Caribbean worker. We want to enhance the profile and attractiveness of the CARICOM labor force, and to harmonize the TVET systems across the region. This too becomes their role too. And so we want you to help them. We want you to help them to do that. Maintains portfolio as per requirements. So we don't leave them on their own, and then when it's time for the CXC auditor or the external verifier to come, then we are rushing to say, where's your portfolio? Where did you put it? We need to be engaged. We need to know where they are. We need to know what they're doing. If we are finding that they're not participating, we need to keep the portfolios sometimes. We have to have control mechanisms, colleagues, whatever works for you, because no one size fits all. Now, we would have gone through some things already about the portfolio development process, but this is the actual process: collection, selection, reflection, projection or direction, and presentation. So it's collection, selection, reflection, projection or direction, and presentation. Collection. Now, for the collection of the students, what are we talking about? We're talking about collection relating to the portfolio development process. When we talk about collection, what are we talking about? Now, the collection looks at really the evidence, and it's a part of the planning, colleagues, a part of the preparation. So the collection infused in this web of activities, infused in this collection process is our planning. What will be collected is the direct or primary evidence, as we call it, which should be oral or written, or the observation of practice, or the indirect or secondary evidence that speaks to the third-party reports or the assessment, you know, those testimonials that we see, the appraisals that we see coming from the workplace evaluation sheets that we see, their actual jobs at work, you know, what persons are saying about their work. This is what we're talking about. Types of evidence, oral or written, what we would have designed. Observation, what we would have designed to capture that practice. And so the assessment programs. Assessment in CVQ is planned. And I told you it's a part of the collection process. When, where, what, who, why, how. Can I tell you that CVQ a lot of effort, and I'm sure as persons, stakeholders engaged in the process, you can agree with me that most of the time is spent in planning. It is very important, colleagues, that you prepare, that you plan adequately for the portfolio process, because it's in planning that you're going to be executing and executing effectively. It should be relevant. We should be looking at the most cost-effective ways for the students to demonstrate competency. Appropriate, is it appropriate for industry and school? Are we looking at what about the established procedures? Are we looking at the competency standards and looking at the critical aspects of evidence, the methods of assessment and the context of assessment? Are we looking at the scope? What is it that should be learned? Are we looking at the elements and the performance criteria? And of course, as I said, user-friendly and linked to standards. It should be win-win, colleagues. Win-win. We should also determine if the candidate is ready for assessment. And this is a part of the collection, Discuss the context, as I just said a while ago. Outline the purpose of the assessment. Why are we doing this? Is it that they understand? So you're doing your assessment plan with the students, and that is why the training, delivery, and assessment plan becomes so important, because you're not only looking at the facilitation strategies, colleagues, you're also looking at assessment. Clarify the standards. Do they understand the standards? How will you facilitate that process? You must have the competency standards. So not just the qualification plan, but the competency standards. We're doing clusters of units. Do they come together? Are we seeing an overlapping of the competencies that must be gained? Establish the types of evidence that will be collected. For this particular or set of outcomes, what evidence will be collected? What are the evidence types? How will they be collected? Specify how will they be collected? Over what period? What are the established deadlines? Very important, colleagues. So we need to understand that evidence-based assessment is one that involves students in the content selection. It's not just what you want, assessors, but we need to negotiate with our students so long as it is linked to the standards, as we have the achievement of the performance outcomes based on the elements and performance criteria. We should ensure that the students are involved in the content selection, planning, execution, and evaluation, because how else are you going to get them to commit? How else are you going to get them to agree? We have in some cases where we've seen assessors allow the students to sign learning contracts, and they too co-sign and date it. So that's something that could be explored. And I will just drop some nuggets as we go along. So that could be used for a next practice, or you could look at it as and consider it a best practice if it could work in your territory, if it could work in your institution. As I said, while we're engaging in this session, it is also a community of practice. It should be guided by the teacher, and in this case, the teacher who is assessor. It includes a collection of authenticated entries. And you see authenticated keeps coming up. What do we mean by that? We should sign. We should date what the students have done. And by that, I mean every piece of work in the portfolio. Even the reflections that are done by the students, yes. It is saying that you're involved in the process, you understand it is a true representation of students' work, whether it's through their reflection, through the assessment pieces of evidence, through whether their resume, their personal statements, their peer reviews, and their self-evaluations, and so on. You should sign and date, but also encourage them to. They should sign and date as well. So authentication is for all stakeholders involved. So once I present my portfolio, and I'm going to share that in a while, so I don't need to go there now. I'm just touching on it now, because we'll be looking at presentation as a part of the process, one component of the process. We should also require teachers and students to be clear on the approach and the criteria from the beginning. And I trust that you are understanding as we go along, you are comfortable with the pace of the workshop. I'll be launching a poll in short order so that I know that you are understanding and that you know or you are comfortable with the way the workshop is going, or in this case, our webinar is going. Requires teachers and students to be clear on the approach and the criteria from the beginning. Colleagues, that is very, very important. We need to require our teachers and students, we must be clear on the approach and the criteria. What does a collection of evidence include? Observations, we would have discussed this prior. Observations, checklist and rating scales, the process and the product. How did we get there? We can't see something in the portfolio that goes straight to product, colleagues. We can't make a determination when that happens. How do we know what happened during the process? What happened during the planning phase? What happened during the actual execution of the activity? And how did we get to that product, final space? Self and peer assessments. We need to include that. Work experience journals and reports. And someone said earlier that the teacher portfolio should have that information in terms of the approval, the authorization for work experience journals and reports. But you should also have the templates that will be used for work experience journals, the templates that you use for reports, for the evaluations, for how they were placed, and also an analysis of what happened there. So the students should also reflect on their work experience. How was it? Were they gophers? Was through experience, the desired working experience, did it really happen? So they really need to be given a chance to reflect. Case studies, simulations, questioning, oral and written. And those are areas that we would have discussed that should be a part of their portfolios. Very, very, very important. If they have testimonials and so on, those should be a part of it. And so you as the teacher and collecting are these are just some of the areas that you'll be looking at. And as we go through the presentation, you'll see in terms of the process, the particular area that I want you to zoom in on, the presentation process, which we'll get to in a while. Then we move from collection to selection. From collecting, we're now selecting. What do we do in this process? It's usually conducted by the trained assessor. You see how important you are, colleagues, to the process? Very important to the process. So it should be conducted by a trained assessor. You should be making judgments on competency-based judgments on the specifications in the standards. Always, that must always be your reference. That must be your true blue. That must be your guiding compass. Determine if the knowledge, skills, and attitude of the candidate are congruent with the expectations of the industry. You should ensure that evidence is valid, authentic, current, and sufficient. Are we measuring what we're supposed to be measuring, colleagues? Authentic, can we say that it is a true representation of student work? Is it current? Was it done in the last 2 years? And sufficient, is it adequate? Are we seeing the performance outcomes based on the competency standards, the elements, the performance criteria, based on the critical aspects of evidence and the context and methods of assessment? Are we seeing that coming to life? Does it tell the true story of VATs? Valid, authentic, current, and sufficient. And now we come to reflection. Colleagues, competency-based education, training, and assessment requires us to reflect. reflect on our past experiences, reflect on work that we would have done, reflect on our progress, and look at how we can make continuous and consistent improvement. The same is required for portfolios. The same thing is required for portfolios. Reflections really should encourage critical thinking. It should encourage communication. It should facilitate the student expression based on their achievement in a particular unit or clusters of units. Students should be highlighting how their achievement, their competence. And even if they're not yet competent the first time around, they should be highlighting that and what they would have done between that period of being not yet competent to that of being competent. It is a journey. And I told your colleagues, it is progression. It should allow for reflection of their own progress and their level of understanding and application of knowledge, skills, and attitude. Now we're going into the projection direction using feedback. So the selection process is where now you would have evaluated the students, so you have marked, right? You have authenticated the evidence which we speak about, the signing and the dating. You would have evaluated, so you would have marked, you would have given a score, and you would have captured that in your logbook or your grade, whatever prescribed template you have for evaluation. It's a part of the selection process. Then you go and we would have spoken about the reflection. So we spoke about collection, selection, reflection. So we move from selection where we mark, score, grade, and we have captured, we have recorded. We have now we've moved to reflection where the students are now documenting their journey, their experience, their challenges, their opportunities for improvement, and how they felt during the process. Now we're going to projection direction where we're using feedback in the candidate portfolio process. We should convey to the students the interest and care of the teachers for the students' care and development. And I've hinted at that before, I've said it before, I've discussed it prior. We should contain personal and professional response of the teacher to each student. It's not seen on your signature. No. What could they have done? How did the students do? What are their opportunities for improvement? Did they do well? You need to speak about it. You need to motivate them. Bring together the teacher's evaluation of the students' learning with the actual response of the students. Remember, we spoke about reflection earlier? So the teacher's evaluation of the students' learning is important, and it should tell a story about what the students would have envisaged as them, whether they're performing to standard or performing based on the competency standards as denoted in the regional occupational standards, or what it is that the teachers requiring of them, how they can improve with that feedback, which is documented, colleagues. It's not you take them up to the table or your teacher's desk and you say something to them and it's arbitrary and it doesn't happen all the time. And we want to make sure that it's consistent and that it's documented. It enhances the students' interest and motivation. Remember, I told you that you're one of their biggest cheerleaders. You have to become a raving fan. You have to show them that you too are engaged in the process, because if you produce lackluster performance or you are not engaged in the process or not motivated as an assessor, then the students your energy feeds into that of the students, and so it ultimately affects their performance, even if they had come into the program prior to do well. And to succeed, I mean they are competent in all units that they would have tried to do, or they would have tried also that they would have had an understanding of the process and would have actually at the end of the day in complete the partial fulfillment or the actual complete the fulfillment of a certification or units that would also guarantee a statement of competence. It enhances it facilitates storage in students' long-term memory. They don't forget. students' role is not what you say, but it is how you made them feel during the process. Now, the elements of feedback. I want to share this with your colleagues. Description. It should describe the aspects of the student's work, stating what has been done or what should have been done. Evaluative judgments. Make evaluative statements. Comments that are linked to the literacies, which highlights the strengths and weaknesses of the work. Suggestions. How could they improve? Alternative approaches. Explanations. Where can the resources be found? If you find that they are weak, where can the resources be found? Where can it be found? How can they access it? And I'm going to tell you some places where you can access it from the council's perspective. Motivating comments. Remember, I told you that you're their biggest cheerleader. You're their raving fan. The statements of encouragement, which explains why work is of a good quality. If the work is of a good quality, share it. Communicate it with them. Let them feel well. Let them produce consistently good quality or good work or quality work. Feedback in CVQ provides information on identified gaps or achievement in competencies. It identified corrective strategies for improvement. It also provides information if there needs to be reassessment. Do you see how important it is? Because we know that we will have students who are not yet competent colleagues. We know that. We know that sometimes we have diverse set of students. We have their different learning styles. You know, they come with their own set of challenges, their own set of expectations, and so we have to guide them. We have to manage the expectations. We have to manage their response. We have to manage the way they execute. They explore evidence, it's collected, it's selected. We have to manage that process. Communicate the appeals process if there are any concern or relating to an assessment decision. And it's usually documented, as I would have indicated earlier. What are the benefits of feedback? Why do we need it? Why does it need to be documented anyways? It clarifies what is considered a good performance based on expected standards or criteria. Remember, colleagues, that it becomes now a part of their memory. You know, remember, it's committed to memory. It facilitates self-assessment and reflection. And so it informs the students about his or her learning, and it motivates the students. So we have moved from collection, right, to selection, to reflection, and we speak about projection or direction. Now we are heading to the meat of the matter, which speaks about the presentation. So all these areas are critical, and we're coming now down to the capstone. What now the external eyes are seeing. And as you see here, feedback is the breakfast of champions. Yay. When I get feedback, I'm motivated. When I get feedback, I'm inspired. When I get feedback, I am ready to make meaningful change and sustain change. I'm consistent, and I want to do better, and I want to be competent. So we have done all of that, and we are now at the finale, punto final, presentation. So we have done all of this. We have collected, we have selected, we have reflected, we have provided direction, right? And we are now at the point where we now need to present. So we have done all the Herculean tasks of getting our candidates ready. And we are now at presentation. How do they present their portfolios? How critical it is that we garner, we collect, we select, you know, we reflect, we go into our projections and our direction. How do we now present? So the CVQ portfolio is usually presented to the assessor, the head of institution, the head of department. Did you know that these persons should be involved in the process? As a matter of fact, the audit speaks to head of institution. We speak to the processes being persons being held accountable and responsible through instructional leadership. We speak to the heads of department, internal verifier. And I spoke about, when we talk about authentication, we're not just talking about the assessor. We're talking about anyone who is actually looking at the student's work for the purpose of the candidate portfolio. So in this case, we're talking about the persons who are directly involved, nor the assessor, the internal verifier, and the external verifier. Now the assessor signs and dates, and as I said, there's also equally responsibility on that part of the candidate. Then we go into the internal verifier, who also must sign and date, because the internal verifier is the person that is responsible for the quality assurance mechanisms in the institution. And so by virtue of this person's role, they're supposed to be reviewing the candidate's portfolio, should have a schedule when they will be doing that, reviewing and sign off to show that they too have seen it and it's a true representation of the student's work. But critical to this process is that of the external verifier. The external verifier is absolutely critical. This person acts on behalf of the national training authorities, and they confirm the judgment of competence that has been placed on the candidate by the assessor. So the facilitator or the assessor may say that, yes, I have assessed the candidate and the candidate has been deemed competent. But did you know that the external verifier can see a live or a recorded assessment activity, or sets of activity or related sets of activities that should promote or enable competence, and they'll be able to make a judgment? Yes, that's how important they are in this process, and they too must authenticate the evidence seen. So if it wasn't happening in your territories, colleagues, maybe it wasn't. Remember, this session is now to bring us full center and circle with the process, and for you to understand and to now implement based on what should be considered established standards. Now the portfolio, did you know that this presented to candidates were also your peers? The peers, because they should also be reviewing the work done by the students. But remember now, although candidates will view, remember the final sign-off should be done by the assessor, who should authenticate the evidence. So even after they have evaluated the peers, and those are the other candidates, colleagues. We spoke about collaboration where they're placed in groups. They are supposed to also sign, but you, the assessor, the ultimate person who verifies or who can actually confer, because really you can verify that in your internal space, but the external verifier is the one who ultimately confirms judgment on behalf of the NTA. And it's so designed that way. So we have layers. If you realize, colleagues, we are seeing layers of QA taking place, and we're also seeing layers in terms of the assessment process and who does what. Now, the CXC Quality Assurance Auditor, when everybody has done all they're supposed to do, the assessor, the head of institution, the heads of department, the internal and external verifier, the pairs, the CX and the Ministry of Education officials and the National Training Agency and TVET council persons, whoever may come in, and because some territories may have a particular department or division that also deals with CVQ within schools. What you are supposed to do, the CXC Quality Assurance Auditor really verifies all of what you said you would have done, and now provides a report to the council as to that these would have been done. So it's a sum total of, so it's the CXC auditor engages in a holistic approach where not only the portfolios are done, but I'm just zooming in on the portfolios, but it's not only the portfolios, and tomorrow you're going to be learning all of that. So let me use this opportunity to welcome you back tomorrow to the CXC certification approach for 2020, where we'll be looking at all of that, the entire process for the training and assessment audits. But for now, I want you to focus on the role as it relates to the portfolios. The CXC quality assurance auditor will be responsible for looking at the holistic execution of the implementation of the candidate portfolio. I will be assessing to see if all the procedures were followed and the mechanisms as outlined by the regional occupational standards, the council, and of course, CANTA. So, the presentation of the portfolio, what should it really look like? This is what it should look like. It should have the title page, the table of content. It should also have the introduction, which includes the resume, personal statements, profile, references. So the title page, table of contents, introduction, and it should also have the varied types of evidence, the oral, the written, the observation of practice, the third-party assessment reports. And we went through some what we would consider. You may ask, how do we manage the oral? Well, you would have a document to manage that oral. It would be called questions to support oral questioning. So questions to support oral assessment. That would be what you will use to capture it. You could also use video, a video representation. You could use audio to capture this type of information. And just to let you know that CXC accepts paper-based and electronic portfolios. But for the purpose of the examination approach in 2020, which I all want you to come tomorrow, you will hear more about that. Now, the outline of the qualification plan, which should be very important and placed after the introduction. And you can put, the students can also put in, you can encourage the students to put in the training, delivery, and assessment plan, or how you would have clustered the units, or how you would have sequenced the units. And the table of content would provide that. But you can also have your plan that you would have communicated to students. Now, self and peer assessments, and those should be completed. Industry attachments, the field trips, the work study, the timesheets, the photographs, the evaluation forms. And I'm going to speak to you about the photographic evidence in a while. The reflections, very important. So remember, the self-evaluation is different from reflections now, colleagues. The self-evaluation is the student, the candidate giving themselves a rating, separate and apart from the reflection, which details their learning journey. The practical evaluation or rubric sheets completed. As I said, you can't have assessor signature, and where we have a line where assessors must sign, then there's no signature. There's no date. Candidate signature, there's no candidate signature, there's no date, but we have the information on the document. No, we want completed documents. Written evidence, signed and dated by assessor, IV. It should be external verifiers as well, and especially on the samples that they are actually, so external verifiers should actually verify all documents. But you know, on the report, the external verification report, usually they write up the report for 5, and if they're 10, or once it's less than 10, they're to write the information. And over 10, you know, you sample a percentage, right? And we recommend at least 5. So candidate marks, scored, graded, and feedback documented. Photographic evidence should be signed, dated, captioned, and should have descriptor titles. Remember, I spoke to you about the photographic evidence. We can't have a student in, for example, the chef, the personal protective equipment. Say their chef coat. And the student is taking a picture, smiling, showing a finished product. No, that is not accepted. We can't have notes padding in a portfolio. Notice that I didn't even put it because I don't want to put notes padding not included. No, I don't put it because it's not supposed to be there. So no, we should not be seeing notes padding. What we're seeing, should be seen is process that culminates with, it's an assessment activity. So we should be seeing the plan, process, and the product. And we should be seeing progression. So what we should be seeing is the step-by-step process to get to where we want to see the competence being derived, colleagues. And so we don't want to see any notes in the portfolios. We do not want to see any copies of presentation that the teachers would have given. We don't want to see. We want to understand it from the plan to the product. So we can't go in and when we look, we see prepare, say we say use measuring devices, for example. So we're in electrical installation, use measuring devices. And we are just seeing the student with a picture measuring something, but there's no caption, there's no progress, there's no task sheet to tell me what it is that you had asked them to do. You did not indicate how they're going to be evaluated. Remember, I told you that it should be communication, should be mutual communication and agreement. Remember, we spoke about that earlier in the presentation. So we need to see that. We need to see where they are, what sort of progress steps have been taken that would allow them or you to determine that they are competent. So the assessor makes a determination. Remember, the external verifier verifies and confirms the judgment. One determines competence based on what they're doing in terms of facilitation. The other verifies what you would have made based on that determination. So the final assessment really rests with or confirmation rests with the external verifier. However, let me hasten to tell you that the quality assurance auditors that are trained by the council are also external verifiers and internal verifiers, and so they too can make the judgment as to whether or not the procedures were followed. So even though you may have the confirmation of judgment coming from an external verifier, then the council is within its own right can say whether or not, based on the procedures that should be followed, if there were breaches or non-conformance or compliance to the established protocols that are in place by the NTAs. So just to let you be aware of that. Now, it should follow too in terms of the portfolio. It should be the learning. We spoke about the stated sequence of assessment activities. The learning and performance of work should be produced over time. There should be the authentication of evidence. It's a part of presentation in our colleagues, remember, the stated sequence. The work should show progression. Remember, we've gone through that. The sufficiency of evidence. We should be looking more than one piece of evidence to secure competency, but let me touch on that a little. When we talk about sufficiency, we are not saying that quantity is quality. Let me repeat. Quantity is not quality. So although you have, so we're saying one piece of work is not sufficient, but we're not saying 10 is either. What we want to see is that the performance outcomes as related to the regional occupational standards based on the context, method of assessment, and the critical aspects of evidence can be observed in the candidate's portfolio. So I see some persons raising hands. I'm asking that when we get to the QA, I'll be able to respond to the questions. So the sufficiency of evidence should relate to the adequacy based on in alignment with the performance standards or performance outcomes. So we look at the elements, the performance criteria. Now we are looking at the range and scope. We're looking at the method of assessment, the context of the assessment, the critical aspects of the assessment. We want to ensure that based on the performance criteria. So you can't produce 10 pieces of evidence. And when we look at the 10 pieces of evidence, we are not seeing some of the critical performance criteria coming out. But you can do a capstone of evidence, which would maybe look at quiz, the practicals, a case study. You could do a simulation that could bring out those expected outcomes as outlined by the regional occupational standards. And I'm going to be calling them ROS in short. So the regional occupational standards are called ROS. So you would have to determine, that is why the collection is important in the colleagues. That part of the process is so critical because it is the planning stage as well, as you determine what is to be collected, how it is to be collected, what, where, when, how, why. It should be retrievable and accessible. I know some of the territories too, we may be having challenges because of the time when COVID would have, the time when we are experiencing COVID, and that we may have difficulties in getting some of those portfolios, but, and I know we have territories here who will be doing CVQ for the first time. Too, they're with us, and I want to just explain how important in terms of the security and preservation of evidence becomes critical to this candidate portfolio process. And so as we talk about presentation, entrenched in the presentation process of the candidate portfolio development is that we should have portfolios that are retrievable and accessible. Who maintains them? Where are they secured? And if not, if the institutions are not maintaining them, because they're evidence, colleagues, and they really should be secured. And if the students have them, then we need to now see how is it. Do we see them periodically, even though they are keeping them? And when it's time for the training and assessment audit, which is the first step into securing certification, where are they? Will they be accessed? Who has the key? Who has access to those records? In the event of an emergency, how do we get them? How can we determine, and how can we, as the council, how can we approach this sort of activity without having these documents readily available, retrievable, and accessible? So we need to look at that, colleagues. And of course, with that, we need to look at how they're effectively stored and secured. And so I have made that point because I want it to be very clear. So we have a number of territories who have started, some that will be started that are represented here. I should think that most territories are represented here. I'll do a roll call in a while. But I want persons to understand how important it is for retrievability and accessibility, and for the effective storage and security of our candidate portfolios. Now, the constructive feedback, as we said, which is a part of the presentation, would be included in the information that should be given to candidates, and it should relate to the elements, performance, criteria, the evidence requirements, the reinstatements, the methods of assessment, and the critical aspects of evidence. And that the evidence must be sufficient, relevant, and current. And this is just summarizing what we would have gone through. And that the evidence must accurately determine that the candidate is competent across the full range of activities as per the unit or units of competencies. Remember, now we can have individual unit assessment, or we can have clusters of assessment. And remember, we cannot facilitate individual unit facilitation, right? We cannot do facilitate unit delivery, individual unit delivery, and then give the students cluster assessment. Or we cannot do cluster facilitation of units, and then we assess our students with individual unit assessment. We have to be consistent, we have to be targeted, and as I said, it must be communicated and agreed with our candidates. So we have gone through the portfolio development process. We would have also looked at the overview of CVQ, would have looked at the assessment arrangements for CVQ. We would have identified what is a candidate portfolio, what is a teacher portfolio. We would have also looked at granular details as to the focus on the candidate portfolio for CVQ. What is a CVQ portfolio? We have also gone into the actual processes, and we would have looked at the various processes, the collection, the selection, the reflection, the projection and direction, and we would have looked at presentation. I trust that I would have thoroughly ventilated those areas, and I would have also spoken at length for your understanding. I just want, before I go into the accessing resources for CVQ, for you to tell me whether or not you understood. You can just write in the chat for a minute. Just let me know what you've understood so far. Are you clear? Are you learning? Can you just give me some feedback in the chat? Let me know how you're progressing. Are you comfortable with the pace? Based on what you would have heard, was it what you were expecting? Has this been somewhat of a learning experience for you? So can you just write in the chat before I go into the accessing resources for CVQ? Tell me so far what your experience has been based on this webinar session. It is not yet concluded, but we just want to know how you're feeling. So can you please share? How has it been going, colleagues? In one word, can you describe how it has been going so far? I'm not seeing the chat, so let me just check.
Mrs. Doman,
Yes.
there are quite a few responses coming up.
Okay.
Persons indicating that it has been great for them, informative, good presentation, much clarity being given, a lot of reinforcement. So those are the comments that are coming up at this time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeanette. All right, colleagues, so we shall continue. I'm happy to know that clarity has been given and that is informative and that you're learning and that information is being reinforced. Grateful. So we're now going into accessing resources, and we will have a few polls before we go into our question and answer session. Now, how can you access resources for CVQ? Remember earlier in the presentation, I shared with you that part of the feedback is to encourage students as to where they can access information for CVQ. But not only that, a part of your training, delivery, and assessment plan would force you to know where you can get that information so that it can be a part of the information that is shared with the candidates or students who now will be candidates for CVQ. First, when you're looking at the administration of CVQ, you can get documents relating to the administration on our CXC website, which is www.cxc.org. You see the various documents that you see on your left, that the achievement sheets, country data form, the internal verification. I'm just giving you some of what would be included there. It's also it's noteworthy to mention that our competency or ROS, Regional Occupational Standards, can be found on the same website. So it's www.cxc.org. So if an institution or a particular territory is interested in pursuing new programs or different programs, you could write to our pro registrar at the Western Zone office in Jamaica to signal in your intention to pursue those new programs, and we can actually come in, that's the council's representatives, auditors, can come in and conduct the pre-readiness audits. Also, know that that information too is present. It's a country data form, and you have the CVQ checklist for readiness and so on, and you can choose to complete those documents and submit, so that we can also, so if you're an existing territory or you're just doing it for the first time, then the documents are there. And of course, you'll have the CXCs, the representatives, to facilitate the process. I being one of them, I'm responsible for the CVQ product implementation. And so you can access the documents on the platform or CXC website. Then we have our CXC Learning Institute. As a matter of fact, this facilitation is being brought to you courtesy of the CXC Learning Institute. And it's our training arm that facilitates training using a combination of synchronous and asynchronous modalities. And so even in our chat, or you can message us privately, or when I shall be sending you you'll see the email addresses on screen. And I will also relate to Jeanette's email as well. You can indicate the courses that you'd want for your territory as it relates to CVQ or any of our products. CC, SLC, CPA, CAPE, CSEC, and CVQ. You can do that, and we will be more than happy to facilitate those sessions for you. But for the purpose of CVQ, I'm letting you know that we facilitate training using a combination of synchronous and asynchronous modalities. So today session and over the next 2 days, the session will come to you from the Learning Institute, being enabled by Mrs. Jeanette Clackin, our instructional designer. So feel free to write us in the chat at this time. You can do it so privately, and you can send to our emails, which will be shared shortly, as to the training that you would want to see for your territory or particular institution. Okay. And so that's the CXC Learning Institute. We're at the CXC Learning Hub. This is where you can get your resources now for different products, as highlighted. It is our e-learning platform that provides learners and instructors with a single access point to multiple resources geared towards exam success. It supports teaching, learning, and assessment of the CXC suite of offerings. So including on this learning hub is our Caribbean vocational qualification resources for our various programs. Just to let you know that we're currently inputting more resources for our CVQ offerings, and over time you're going to be seeing a population of our CVQ programs that you can access. If you're having issues, please do not hesitate to contact me or any of our persons within the syllabus and curriculum division, and we'll be more than happy to assist you further. So if you are not seeing a particular program, for example, that you'd like to see featured on this platform, please let us know. And you can even send us resource persons who can provide those resources for us, so that it can help in the facilitation and ultimate certification of candidates for competence in their relevant CVQ program. So we have gone through our access of resources, and I spoke to you about our website, which is the www.cxc.org, and I would have gone through about the Learning Institute, of which the 3 webinars will be coming directly courtesy of that platform. I have also spoken to you about the CXC Learning Hub, and to let you know that all of you who are participants in this webinar are invited to access all 3. Having said that, we've now come to the end of the facilitation for the CVQ portfolio development process. We now invite questions for answers or possible answers, after which I'll share the email addresses of the respective persons, and I'll ask Jeanette to also put her email in the chat. If persons would like to see courses being offered on the Learning Institute that you think persons in your territory, institutions, or across the region could benefit from. And so at this time, colleagues, let me thank you though for being a keen audience. And I now invite questions at this time. Colleagues, are there any questions?
Mrs. Doman, there are a number of hands raised.
Okay. Can't see.
So I am gonna go ahead and
Yes, please.
open some of those microphones. In the meantime, we invite participants to respond to a poll question we're about to launch regarding the type of entity you are a part of or representing today. So I'm going to launch that poll now and then begin to open the microphones based on the hands raised in the attendees
Please.
list.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So Kevin Singh, I see you have a question. So Kevin, I'm about to open your microphone now. All right, Kevin, it says you're using an older version of Zoom, so we're gonna allow you to promote it to a panelist just for now so you can speak. Go ahead. Kevin? All right. It seems as if Kevin is having
You
some
could write in the
technical
chat.
challenge. You're right, so, all right. Okay. Winston Steele, go ahead. Winston?
I think some persons are also writing in the QA. I'm seeing some questions coming up.
Okay. All right. So you may want to address them as they are.
Yes. So there's one question that speaks to if a sample portfolio was spoken of, or we'll be showing one here. No, a sample portfolio wasn't shown, and one will not be shown here. And one of the reasons for doing that is because we wanted to show you about in terms of a generalized approach to the portfolio assessment, development, and the assessment, because remember, territories and institutions will vary in terms of their approach, but the standards relating to the portfolio development remains. And that is why I spoke about some of the peculiarities, some nuances, and some of the practices that we would have seen that would not constitute or augur well for good portfolio development practices. But so this workshop was designed, this webinar was designed to address those inconsistencies and those identified gaps, as well as to promote the effective use or the efficacy of the portfolio development process in the ultimate preparation, in your execution of having a finished product, of having a CVQ candidate portfolio.
All right, thank you for that. Let's try Winston Steele. Winston, can you unmute your microphone and ask your question, please? All right, I'm not hearing from Winston. What about Antoinette Foster? Antoinette Foster, unmute your microphone. Or she lowered her hand. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead, Antoinette. Antoinette, we can hear you. Go ahead. Antoinette, your microphone is open. You can go ahead.
That was an error.
Oh, okay. All right. Mrs. Doman, you can take another question from the QA while I queue up another individual.
Sure. This one is a request or recommendation but this question I would love to address that tomorrow, where the review of the request to convert the hard portfolios to an e-portfolio for 2020 is proven to be an extremely challenging exercise. It may take several weeks due to several challenges, and the person has highlighted some of what is happening in their territory. And so we would want to discuss that tomorrow, but just to share that we will be given timelines. We understand that there are some issues within territories in terms of converting the paper-based portfolios. We also have an understanding that some territories have also been producing and paper-based portfolios. So for the paper-based portfolios, we'll be giving context to that in terms of the timelines that the territory can submit, where you're saying the scanning of each page, but we will see how best in terms of the uploads, in terms of the size and formats, and that will be shared tomorrow, which will be a part of my presentation tomorrow. So Shazard, I'm not sure if you'll be a part of the presentation tomorrow. I would love for you to join so we could delve into the issues that you have raised for the 2020 certification process. So we will be looking at that, but I would want to encourage you to come tomorrow so we can have, because I trust that there may be other challenges being experienced by other territories, and so we want to collectively address those issues.
Okay, thank you. Victoria Marshall, can you go ahead and unmute for us, please, and ask your question? Victoria Marshall? All right, what about Sherry Lee Christmas?
Am I being heard?
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure if I'm being heard.
Yes, you are. Yes, yes, Shirley. Shirley.
If I'm being heard, my question.
That is Victoria.
Go ahead with your question.
Hello.
Yes, Shirley or Victoria.
Shirley, your mic is open.
Just in case I'm being heard, my question has to do with the information that was given just before the assessing of the resources of the CVQ. And I just wanted some clarity on the unit or the clustering of the unit certification. I wasn't clear on what was being said.
Okay. Thank you very much. In response to you is that we can do two types of facilitation in our approach to the unit delivery of the CVQ. One, we can engage in unit delivery, where we look at the facilitation of individual units, mandatory units, so what we call core units or mandatory units. So we can do individual delivery. So say, for example, communicate on the telephone. We can do communicate in the workplace individually. We can do operate in a culturally diverse work environment individually. And we can do work with colleagues and customers individually. We can also cluster what I've just shared with you. The 4 or 5 units that I've just shared with you can be clustered for unit delivery. When we put them together, so we look at like elements across the competency standards, and we can actually facilitate them together. because they have similar context of assessment, method of assessment, and the same critical aspects of evidence are similar in terms of the requirements. We can also look at the elements and the performance criteria and look at the similarities and facilitate it as a cluster. Cluster meaning a group of 3 to 5 set of units can be delivered and assessed. So just as how we would have delivered them, we assess them together. That's what I was saying. I know somebody, I don't know if you were the person who said they didn't know that they could have done the clustering and they wanted to know the difference between the clustering and the unit delivery. So units can be done individually, but for sameness, when you look across the competency standards and you see the sameness based on the elements and the performance criteria, what we call the performance outcomes, we can put them together and facilitate them, deliver them based on the similarities. Do you understand? And I gave an example of how it can be done. So rather than doing one, because you will find that more or one competency leads to the other, or the candidate needs to progress from one to the other. So for example, operating a diverse work environment and work with colleagues and customers would have similar components. Because to operate in a diverse cultural environment, you have to work in groups. To work with colleagues and customers, you have to work in groups. You have to communicate in groups. To communicate on the telephone would be one aspect of communication. So you can show that through an activity, which you can combine with also group, put them in groups, and they can do a particular activity which would bring out the performance outcomes for those 3, 4, or 5 that I would have just mentioned. Communicate on the telephone, communicate in the workplace. You look at different forms of communication. You look at how it will affect persons in diverse groups, persons who are disabled, persons who are marginalized, persons who are minority groups, so on. Operate and work with colleagues and customers. How do you handle disgruntled customers over the telephone? You could put that communicating on the telephone as a part of the strategy in terms of the delivery and the assessment. Are you now clear? Hello?
Shirley?
Shirley?
That wasn't Shirley's voice. You mentioned my name, but that wasn't my voice. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm awaiting my time.
Okay. Are you sufficiently clear? I'm not sure who had. Are you sufficiently clear, colleague? My colleague, are you sufficiently clear? I'm not hearing the person. Maybe you're on, your mic is muted.
That would have been Victoria, I believe.
Okay, Victoria, are you clear? She said she's unable to hear the dialogue.
Okay. That may be a bandwidth challenge on her side.
Oh, wow. I hope she was. If not, I would be more than happy for her to speak to me outside of this medium and I can further explain.
Sure,
so I
thank you
trust
for
someone
that.
who knows her, or if she's able to access the chat, to let her know that I will be more than happy to explain that to her or repeat what I've just said. Go ahead, Jeanette.
So Shirley?
Shirley, good morning
Shirley,
again.
okay.
Yes. In your introduction, you spoke to the harmonization of TVET system across the region. And with the big elephant in the room that we are now dealing with, are we going to be seeing like a standardized portfolio, not portfolio, but protocol coming from the team as it relates to what are the guidelines to be followed by TVET facilitators here on? Given the nature of our assessment, it's more hands-on and we have to be interacting and so on. Are we going to be seeing, that standardized instrument coming from CVQ or from the CVQ team to guide facilitators?
Okay, in response to that question, just to let you know, yes, I did mention the harmonizing of the TVET systems across the region, and that is done by CANTA, which is the Caribbean Association of National Training Authorities. So that's one of the objectives in terms of the CVQ, and they would have started that because that is done by CANTA, where it's an association of all national training authorities across the region. Two, in terms of the assessments and so on, while CXC acknowledges the work that is done by the various territories, it's important to note that the territories, CXC provides the guidelines, which is in the form of a handbook, which outlines the requirements and guidelines for school administrators and principals. The curricularization of the CVQ in terms of its implementation really relies in terms of the teaching, learning, and assessment, teaching, delivery, learning, and assessment, really has to do with the Ministry of Education and the NTAs in your respective territories, or if there isn't an NTA in a territory, one that would have the territory is aligned to, because the territory must be, if the territory does not have an NTA, the territory must be aligned to NTA. And so the assessment, you have some NTAs that will provide prescribed assessment packages, but we are saying to our territories and our institutions, you may have that, and that is good. But in the absence of that, colleagues, you can design your assessment instruments, because what you're looking for is the performance outcomes that can be carried out through a variety and a diverse number of assessment strategies that you can actually design, you can compile, and you can standardize within your territories to say that you're going to standardize across. We may have peculiarities and differences, colleagues, and also uniqueness in our laws, in our regulatory framework, in our governance systems, and also in even our curricular approach and to implementation of CVQ, and not only CVQ, but any product that we have for certification. And so the council does not interfere into the micro implementation of the respective territories or institutions or NTAs. We issue the certificates at the levels 1 and 2 to candidates once they have completed all the mandatory units for the occupational area, and provide the statements to candidates who have completed only some of those units. So CXC provides, it's more of a, because we're an examination board, we actually are more involved in the preservation of the integrity of the assessment outcomes that will lead to the, not only the assessment outcomes, but the extent to which the regional occupational standards are being implemented, as well as the quality assurance mechanism. So that is our role in the process. But the CANTA would it is maybe something that can be considered by CANTA, but just to let you know that it is really curricularized at the local level based on those peculiarities that I've just mentioned. But you can design it, and it can be standardized, and it can be validated. It can be endorsed too by the NTAs that you're attached to and your ministries of education. And CXC, you can ask CXC now to come in and even look at what you have and to see if it could be converted into a prescribed assessment package.
Thank you, Mrs. Drummond. Shirley, was that helpful?
Yes. I think the question was answered in terms of standardization of assessment, but I was really looking at standardization of mode of operation going forward. In how do we go about this hands-on learning aspect in the wake of a pandemic?
Okay, in the wake of you were saying in the wake of the pandemic. In the wake of the
that's
pandemic.
The elephant.
Okay, so the COVID, so you're speaking about the COVID, so you want specifics as to how
we are going to be seeing that standardized documentation to standardize throughout. Yeah, the new form of occupational safety that we need to put in place as facilitators.
You're seeing, I hear where you're going. You're speaking about maybe the asynchronous or synchronous approaches as to what could be used. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, for the practicals and so on. That's something that Kanta could look at, and I'm sure CXC could provide some information or assistance where that is concerned. But I hear what you're saying now in terms of are we going to
but then what you explained
was
was something I wanted to find out about as well. And may I ask one last question as well? You spoke to collection of evidence and selection of the process. So we're saying that we're collecting students' evidences, right? Given that they might be competent at any point. But are we going to select the best, or the portfolio will have all of their evidences? I know we're going to select a portion to mark, but should they have the entire, the processes in that portfolio? Okay. Or should we just select a few?
Remember now, the collection spoke about the planning and preparation, and also to determine the types of evidence that will be collected.
Right.
So although you will have a series of evidence that will be collected, we went to selection. So that process is still critical. Okay. What you want to know if it's all of that will be in the portfolio.
Yes.
It is dependent on the assessor to make that determination. Okay.
Right.
Because remember I said that the adequacy, remember we spoke to VAX in terms of the evidence collection and selection speaks to evidence. So we're talking about validity, authenticity, right? Currency and sufficiency. So all of that will be taken into consideration to determine whether or not from what you collect, you select, or from all that you've collected, you can use as both collection and selection. It is entirely up to the assessor.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. You're welcome.
Thanks much.
Thanks for that. Mrs. Doman, earlier there was a question regarding the principal's role in the matter of the student and teacher portfolio. Would you want to expound a little bit on that?
Sure. The principal's role in the implementation, as a matter of fact, prior to any implementation of the Caribbean vocational qualification within a particular territory, or to get to be localized now to a particular institution, we do what is known as a pre-readiness exercise. The pre-readiness exercise is what we call a head of institution activity. It's the head of institution audit because we look at the teaching learning systems relating to CVQ support, the training facilities, administrative systems, and the training and assessment systems. Why do we do that? We do that to see whether or not there are arrangements in place to facilitate CVQ, the implementation of CVQs. We do not bestow that responsibility of CVQ implementation to just the assessor or the internal verifier who would have been trained by the NTA. We're saying as an institution, the principals must provide instructional leadership in understanding how CVQ is administered, how CVQ is implemented, which means, as it relates to the candidate portfolio, they should understand that the products that the candidates are producing, that the teacher or the assessor is adhering to the role and responsibility, the internal verifier is adhering to the role and responsibility, and the learner or the candidate in this case is adhering to the role and responsibility in the collection, the selection, the reflection, the projection or direction, and the presentation of the candidate portfolio. We want the instructional leadership, who is the persons who are at the head of institution, the vice principal, the principal, to understand that these students, this is certification, and for some of them, it's the only certification that will enable them to go in the world of work. And so it's very important, the onus, the ultimate responsibility, and it starts with instructional leadership, that they understand the importance of ensuring that students would have met the requirements or would have been in the process of meeting the requirements to attain either a statement of competence or a full certification in the CVQ program of choice. That is the reason for the involvement and the engagement of principals in the process.
All right, thank you. We have a hand raised by Bertilian Hamilton. That person's mic is open, so I'm going to allow that person to speak now and then come to a question regarding e-portfolios. All right, Hamilton, you may speak.
Yeah, good morning, colleagues. I'm just verifying some information regarding the level 1 and 2 programs. At the form 4 and 5 level, we can pursue the level 1 and 2 programs because some programs, some of the offerings only start at level 2.
In response to that question, if where programs do not have a level 1, yes, you can go straight to, for level 2, preparing your students. So you can implement CVQ programs that just start at level 2. That is fine. CXC is responsible for levels 1 and 2 to candidates. Once they would have completed certifying or issuing certificates to them, once they would have completed all the mandatory units, or would have given them if they have completed only some in a statement of competency. So if they're only level 2 for that particular program of choice, you may go ahead. For levels 4 and 5 that you've just mentioned, we do not offer levels 4 and 5. It's usually done through the NTA. But for if countries are desirous to do, say, level 3, then authorization will have to come through the council, of course, after consultation with CANTA, if a territory may so desire. But levels 4 and 5, we're talking, when you look at the qualifications framework, that would be pitched at diploma and degree level. And so we do not offer that. But out of school population would be with the NTAs for that facilitation and implementation of those CVQ programs.
Okay, just to confirm, so if there's level 1 and 2 and the units are close, you have to do level 1. You cannot do level 2 because there are some programs, for example.
Yes, you can do levels 1 and 2. Let me make it clear. You can do levels 1 and level 2. You can also choose not to do level 1 and go straight to level 2.
Okay, because I was looking at one of the standards for the foods program, which is just a basic
program, sorry?
2 units. One, the foods program.
Okay, foods, okay.
Yeah. There's only 2 additional units required in the level 2 as opposed to level.
Can you tell me which foods program though?
It's food preparation and cooking.
Okay, commercial food, it is advisable though.
Not commercial food preparation and cooking.
Okay, but it's advisable if we're doing food commercial, especially for commercial food and preparation, that you do not go straight to a level 2 for your students, because they need to know knife skills and techniques. And there's some in terms of different sauces and soups and certain fundamentals that are critical before it is level 2 is approached. In terms of industry, some critical industry standards. But I'm just making the point that you can do level 1 and level 2. A territory may just do level 2. And a territory where there are no level 1s in a particular program of choice, they can just go straight to level 2.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mrs. Zoman, there are a number of questions in the Q&A relating to e-portfolio. Can you give the official position on that, please?
E-portfolio. Is Miss Williams, Jadine?
So there's a question that says, you mentioned that CXC accepts e-portfolio. Is this information communicated in writing to the Ministry of Education or the NTA? And there's another comment that speaks to a request for review to convert hard portfolios into e-portfolios for 2020.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. I have the senior manager from SCD. She's here, as well as I'm hoping that the director of operations is also here with us. Still, that I would seek for, because we're a team, colleagues, a team of 6 representatives are here. And at this time, I yield to Jadine, if she's here, still here, or Nicole Manning, who is the director of operations, and she has responsibility for the examinations. Good morning, everyone. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So yes, the communique was sent to all the ministries of education, our local registrars, our national training agencies, and the TVET councils across the territories. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So you've just heard from the director of operations, Mrs. Nicole Manning, who has said that yes, that information was sent to the Ministry of Education and entities and communicated to the territories.
All right, thank you. We're gonna allow Damona Taylor to go ahead. Damona, you may unmute your mic and ask your question.
Good morning. My question is, you mentioned in the evidence that there is a tool called Questions to Support Oral Assessment. Where can that be accessed and how is that used? And how do you represent that in the portfolio in the final analysis if you're using it alongside your oral assessment?
Okay. I spoke about a template that can be designed. The template that can be designed would be known as Question to Support Oral Assessment. So if you are seeing for example, an observation, you're looking at an observation of, say, provide food and beverage service or produce or wire an electrical circuit, and there are certain competencies or activities or in terms of sets of steps that should be followed that you're not seeing, you may devise a document that you look at certain questions that we call probing questions and ask about those sequence or steps that were missed by the candidate during a demonstration or observation of practice, or 2, even if there wasn't an observation of practice and you just want to ask those questions, you can design that document, which is called Questions to Support Oral Assessment or Observation, and you could put the questions in the document and ask the questions, and based on the response, you can say whether the students were competent or not yet competent. So you would put that information in the portfolio along with the competency rating, the candidate signature, the assessor signature, and the dates.
Okay. Okay. So it is, when we're looking at the oral assessment, because maybe I'm still not as clear as I need to be on that. For example, when I administer oral assessment to my students, I would have had the questions, and for the copy that I'm putting in my portfolio per se, I would have had the questions and I would have had the answers, and then the copy that the students are using, they would have had the rubric to say how much they get for that question, and it would have been signed off by myself and the internal verifier or whoever else does it, and the student.
That's the same process.
That's the same tool. Oh.
Same process. Same thing that I just said, where you would have indicated the questions. And remember, I told you about your teacher portfolio should have your mark schemes or your table of
Right, it's a copy of that would have been in the
right.
portfolio?
Yes.
Oh, it's the same thing. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Yes, because what and one of the reasons for sharing would be that you have persons who say, but I did ask the questions, but there's no evidence. So nothing is wrong with using oral questioning or doing oral assessment. But what I would have just shared, which would have been cemented by what you just expressed, would have been what needs to be in the portfolio to show evidence. Because what we want to see is to verify what you said or what the candidate said would have been done.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Mrs. Dorman, there are a few more questions in the Q&A that we would like to respond to. Can the work experience section be excluded from the 2021 portfolio, 2020 to 2021 portfolio?
Okay, let me respond to that. These are just inclusions if the students are able to go on work experience. Remember, some territories even do not allow their students to go on work experience once they're pursuing level 1, because of course the indemnity issues that may present itself in the particular territory. And again, remember we spoke about the peculiarities and the legal and regulatory framework that is in, and governance systems that would be in those territories may vary. So if your students did not go on work experience, it will not be used against the students. It will not be used against the students if that was something that would have been done during the period when COVID impacted the territory.
All right,
we would have considered that, so it will be discretionary for 2020.
All right, thanks for
And we'll
that.
see what happens in 2021.
Okay. When will the council be accepting textiles, clothing, and fashion portfolios?
The council would have asked, once a program is being implemented, colleagues, remember I told you about the process? Once the territory would have gone through the appropriate channels of seeking to implement CVQ in their respective territories, we're not averse to any particular program of choice, as indicated by the territory. And so if textile and fashion is one of the CVQ programs, we would now, the territory will now have to make representation to the pro registrar, and I did indicate where the forms can be accessed, as well as a letter indicating that they wish to pursue these programs, providing that they're level 1 and level 2. Remember, I told you if it's level 3, authorization must be sought. And the pre-readiness audit will be conducted. The pre-readiness audit will be conducted for those activities and communicated by the pro registrar to the respective permanent secretaries in the territories who would have so requested, same. And after that, you may request what we call the in-training audit, which is when you would have completed the 50% training, and that is not mandatory, but the pre-readiness is mandatory. And then where we are now, which is the training and assessment, where it is the process, is the first phase in the process of enabling certification, then we could go on to that. So CXC is not averse or would not tell any territory not to, or that they cannot pursue textiles, clothing, or and for any other program unless they would not have met the 80% audit rating as outlined in our pre-readiness, and would have to go through those set of processes that I would have earlier indicated for them to be authorized to do so.
Okay, thank you. Nicole Jarrett has her hand up, and we'll take her question now. Nicole, you may want to unmute your mic. Nicole Jarrett. All right, we're not hearing from Nicole. While we wait on Nicole, there is another question regarding the volume of paperwork. A comment here that says the paperwork is too much, especially when the assessor teaches other subjects. What can be done to assist in that regard in reducing the amount of paperwork? Is there a response to that question?
Okay, thank you very much. The paperwork. Can I tell you that as TVET practitioners, that's something that we would have struggled with over time, not only having to do with just with the council, but generally. TVET or the See Better approach, it can be paper intensive, and even if it's not paper intensive and we're going the route of electronic portfolio submission, you are still required to have certain templates or to develop certain documents which would have been a part of the planning prior to the execution of any CVQ program. And so there is not much that we can do based on the nature of the animal that we're dealing with, more than to say where you can cluster information. But the planning colleagues, we still would have had to do the planning. So if we're looking at paper or we're looking at documentation, what is really different would just be the submission documents at the end, which is the part for verifying certification, the candidate achievement sheets, the portfolio completion summaries, the internal verification reports, and the external verification reports. But if we are really to match what we would have learned as facilitators and teachers and assessors, it's pretty much it's the same in terms of the requirements, because we need, but this is evidence-based, and so we must produce the evidence, whether it's electronically produced or paper-based, because we still have to produce our lesson plans for other subjects. We still have to do, we ought to be doing our table of specification or mark schemes. We should be doing our different documents for our practicals, and also our rubrics for research and projects that we give our students. We should be looking at how we mark our case studies. So if we follow all that we would have taught in terms of the pedagogical approaches and so on, we would have been implementing those systems just the same. The marks and the scores and so on, the only thing we're saying is that show us your evidence, and that may require more work. And as I always say, the preparation is usually the time-consuming part. I understand the labor intensity of getting it done, but some of these paper or documentation required, for the most part, would have been, ought to be required in our other spheres of work or activities that we do relating to our portfolio. The only difference, as I would have indicated, would have been the section that speaks to the verification of what happens in terms of, which is a part of our quality assurance measure, whether electronic or paper-based.
Okay, thank you. Someone is asking for you to repeat the information which should be placed on the page with the photo evidence.
Okay. So for the photographic evidence, we want to make sure that we're seeing the process. So we look at the first, or any activity that we're going to be undertaking that requires photographic evidence, we need to look at the task or activity sheets, right? First. Then we need to have the document, where we're having the photographic evidence, we need to have the caption of the particular unit and the tasks that are being done based on the activity sheets. Then we're going to be looking at the sequence now, the steps. Step 1, what the candidate did. Step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, however, the number of steps that would be in the photographic evidence. Now, it should give descriptors as to what is happening in these steps. Then it should be signed and dated by the candidate, signed and dated by the assessor. Because what it is showing is that the student is actually doing is an observation of practice, but the evidence of the photographic evidence must tell a story. If the external verifier, internal verifier, or the CXE auditor wasn't there, or the principal, whomever, it must tell a story of what happened. So it cannot be, it should be the students at work doing the activity or doing this, the steps required, or the process steps in the activity. It couldn't be that we're looking at just the student taking a picture of the final product. And it shouldn't be that the students are taking a picture, just doing idly in their same personal protective equipment, but idly taking pictures or showing that they're in the lab. But they should be doing something. And the picture showing that the picture should depict the actual activities to determine the competence for the activity that the student is doing. In other words, validity in how the pictures are representing the evidence should be taken into consideration. I trust that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. What exactly is the question to support oral assessment tool, and how is it to be used in the oral assessment procedure?
Okay, so I spoke about the oral assessments because I know that persons would have said, or candidates would have spoken about that the teacher had asked them the question and they answered it, but there's no evidence in the portfolio. So for the persons who have not yet been administering oral assessments and you plan to, or you were doing it or you weren't doing it properly, I'm going to repeat what is to be done. You must capture those questions and put on it. You can put oral assessment or question to support oral assessment or questions to support observation, because you can use it for two scenarios. One, if you're using it to support the actual just oral questioning, one, or two, if you're using it where a demonstration, a student is demonstrating and you're observing the practice and there are steps that they would have missed out, you're using it to probe. You're going to document the questions because the external verifier and the auditor don't know what you did. You're going to document your questions. You're going to have an answer sheet. So the questions will have answers as to possible answers for those questions. That will be in your teacher portfolio and the marks that you're going to be assigning. The one that the students will have the questions and just the marks that will be assigned. It will not have the answers, but you'll have a competency rating that says whether yes or no, whether they answered it correctly or not. Then you will sign the sheet and date it. Remember I spoke about authentication. We authenticate everything in CVQ, or authenticate everything in the portfolio. We sign and we date candidate, assessor, signatures, and date. Then you would provide feedback on that same document. You'd put an area for feedback, and then you will also collate the scores. You put the scores on the document. You will also, it's the same process as you would do any assessment strategy or any method of collecting evidence. And then you would capture that information in your grade books. When the assessor or the external verifier comes and the student speaks or the candidate speaks that they did the portfolio, we can say yes, they did the oral questioning, they asked about the oral questioning, but we can say where's the evidence? They can point us to the evidence. That's what I mean by saying that you can also do the oral questioning, but you must provide evidence. That is the strategy for providing evidence. In your assessor training, that should have been taught, because the assessor training should share with you the various modes of collecting the evidence and how to do so. But I'm just sharing with you that if you're having that difficulty or having a challenge, or where you would have started it already and there were issues before, this is how you adequately capture the evidence. I trust you are now clearer. And so in the execution of this particular modality, then you will show the evidence when asked.
Thank you for that. There are a few questions relating to training. I'm just going to ask them all at this point. One relates to whether or not there is principal training, and two if there will be training conducted outside of Jamaica for assessors, and if persons who are previously trained as assessors in Jamaica can operate in other territories.
Once you're an assessor, and you have met the guidelines, I don't know if those questions, well, once you're an assessor, you have met the guidelines based on the territory that you're requesting to work on the Caribbean single market economy. And you have been successful in the recruitment and selection process. And by all means, the same information or the same transfer of knowledge will be applicable to the territory if you're a trained assessor, internal verifier, or external verifier. The NTAs, you should use a standardized process of facilitation that will make you ease of facilitation or ease of implementation or ease of access to work in any of the territories. So that is in response to that question. For the one that speaks as principal training, in an effort to have the implementation of CVQs in the respective territories. Apart from the training that is offered by the NTA with the assessor, internal verifier, and so on. Sometimes they have CBETA training as well. They have different training from time to time. Remember that territories can also implement their own training or training of principals to understand their instructional leadership in this process. Also, in CVQ implementation and administration, also we at the council stand ready to assist or support territories in the execution. And so the territories can write to us to have principals training to understand CVQ. We have had territories, we have done that for territories. We have done on-site training, we have done electronic, similar to what we're doing now, the facilitation, the online facilitation of those training programs we have done on site, because territories may ask us to do product implementation in territory. So we have done it for principals, we have done it for as the same assessors that would have been internal verifiers, all the persons, stakeholders that are responsible for CVQ implementation in territories. And so that can be a conversation that can be had with us. As I told you, you can private message me, as well as you'll get the emails as to what you can do. And territories are free to request of CXC, and we can further guide you and tell you what can be done in your respective territories, and how we can provide different assistance, or we can recommend or refer you to different persons or agencies or entities that are partners in the process.
Okay, thanks for that. Where can we put the notes if it should not be in the candidate's portfolio? That's a question coming from an attendee.
Okay, thank you. The notes can they can have their regular notebook, or they can have a folder that they put their notes in, and just for notes purposes relating to CVQ, but it must never be in the portfolio, the assessment portfolio. The assessment portfolio is an evidence-based portfolio that maps the student's progress over time for and in fulfillment or partial fulfillment of certification for CVQ. When notes are in the portfolio's notes, we cannot determine competence from notes because it's just simply regurgitation or rote information that there's no competence to be assessed from that. So it should be, they can either put it in a folder just for notes taking, but just to be sure, or their notebook, or just to let you know that the CXC candidate portfolio is compiled for the sole purpose of certification.
Okay, thank you. What will be the role of the guidance counselor in helping to implement the CVQ?
The role of very good question. Did you know that, yes, any guidance counselors can play their role, or where you have career development officers can play their role in helping to implement CVQ by way of providing career guidance? So they can provide information in terms of what is happening in the labor market,
or what is happening in terms, even if we're there. Well, I don't know how the territories treat, whether their guidance counselors only deal with maladaptive behaviors and deal with in terms of motivational activities relating to school and so on, or they deal with just the awards and so on. Because different, as I said, different territories based on governance, legal and regulatory framework differ. And so if the guide, if person asks about the role of guidance counselors, then one of the first things before I can say anything as to the guidance counselor or whatever work they do is to look at their JDs. So if it is a case where they are responsible to provide career guidance, then they should provide it to the CVQ students as well. It shouldn't be a case where the student they are seen as different, but also it's an integration of school in terms of certification, because remember, what we're doing is offering multiple opportunities for certification where students can either pursue further education or enter the world of work.
All right, thank you for that. There are still a number of questions coming in around the topic of the e-portfolio, some relating to the challenges being faced with the scanning of the documents currently, and others wanting to have a sense of what the communication that Mrs. Manning spoke to earlier would have entailed. So I'm not sure which of you ladies would be able to respond, better able to respond to those kinds of questions.
As it relates to the e-portfolios usually, which that's the, I really want to have that discussion. Colleagues, I trust that you'll be here tomorrow. Same time, same place, where we'll be discussing the CVQ certification approach for 2020, of which we're asking for, yes, the electronic submission of portfolios.
Okay.
Not necessarily that they're e-portfolios at this time, because we do understand, colleagues, that some of them are paper-based. Currently, they are paper-based, and that you are now having to convert, which is through scanning, which may be labor-intensive and rather tedious and time-consuming to upload and to submit to your local registrars. But in light of COVID and the impact that it would have had on the face-to-face interactions in our respective territories, we're saying that the best way to seek certification for your candidates, colleagues, is through this modality. We know it is not easy. We know it's difficult. We know that this is just entrusted upon you at this time. And we're saying to see how best we can work together to get it done. We want to certify your candidates. We can't come into the territory based on the COVID protocols and the measures that have been in place by territories. Yes, we understand that some of them are now COVID free, but we do understand we have to look at where we're operating from and the different peculiarities that exist in our island territories. And with that, we're asking you to do it. We know it's not easy. We know you may not even finish. No, or so, but so we are saying individually we'll reach out to you. Where are you? How can we help you? What timeline do you think we'll have to give you? All right, these are the schools that will be sampled for now. This is what we will be doing. However, we want all of them to be verified and submitted. So we are saying, colleagues, we do understand in terms of maybe that's why the question was asked about the e-portfolio, or it's because I mentioned about the e-portfolio earlier that you can actually have it. Some territories actually store some of their portfolios electronically. I know Jamaica does some of that. I know Trinidad does some of that. I do know that some territories have that sort of mechanism in place to facilitate their students as it relates to the security and storage of the portfolios. But we also do understand that some of the portfolios are very bulky and the imagery may be affected. But colleagues, remember, we're going to be doing interviews with the students too, you know, to probe them. Remember, we're triangulating evidence now. We're looking at different aspects to confirm this competence. And so we understand that there are some issues, but we'll try to see how best we can work with you. And tomorrow we'll share what we are doing at the council to facilitate that upload in terms of the file types and size, and the portal where you can do that sort of thing, and it will be done through your local registrars. So colleagues, bear with us as we try, because we used to see the evidence on site. The only way we can try and see it now is if we have the scanning and review. Can you imagine having to go through all those portfolios, colleagues? It is difficult and challenging for all of us, but let us see how we can do it for mutual benefit, and may success attend all your endeavors. As we know, we at the council know that it's a rather tedious exercise.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Dorman. Just a few more questions left in the Q&A, just a few. And there were some hands up, but they've been taken down. So I'll just quickly get to those few questions. There was a question about assessor training in the various territories, but I suppose that is the purview of the individual territory Ministry of Education.
Yes, which I raised, yes.
Right. So I'm going to the second to last question. And I think you have indicated already that some of these questions relating to the certification / e-portfolio will be covered in tomorrow's session. All right, so we invite participants to join us tomorrow for a more extensive discussion on that.
Yes, please.
So here are the last two questions. What are the requirements needed to implement level 2 in schools? And kindly explain the point about unit certification or clustering.
Okay, so Victoria, I know I would have responded to Victoria in terms of the unit clustering versus the individual units, facilitation or delivery. So I would have done that. Victoria, to ask, let me know if you're clearer or if you don't understand. Remember, you can speak to me privately, colleagues. Remember, I will avail myself, and you can write me based on the email that I'll be sharing in a while. So I would have gone through that, the difference between the unit clustering and the units clustering as versus just having individual unit facilitation. Now, as it relates to, what was the other question, Jeanette? Was there, how to implement level 2 in the territories? To implement level 2 in the territories, if you have done level 1, is to, if you were audited for a particular area that covers level 2, the territories can go ahead and have the implementation done. But remember, prior to that, if this new and the facility audits did not cover that, remember, you can access the information at on the CXC, www.cxc.org, where you can look at the country data form, and you can also do the expression of interest to do that. That is sent to the pro registrar, who is located at the Western Zone office in Jamaica, and outline the programs that you would like to do and the requisite documentation that I told you that can be accessed at www.cxc.org. And we can now communicate with you and do some hand holding. And prior to that, have an auditor come into the territory to conduct the pre-readiness audit. Remember, the audits are usually on site, hopefully we can have it next year on site, because that is whether we're doing training and assessment audits or pre-readiness audits. But to answer your question for level 2 is that must be done before, so that a determination can be made based on the suitability or the audit rating, 80% audit rating to implement such an active the program or programs.
Okay, thank you for that. I see Nicole Jarrett has her hand up, so I'm gonna ask Nicole to go ahead now. Nicole Jarrett.
Hi, good morning. I have heard you before, but when you summoned me to speak, but I was at a location that was very noisy, so I couldn't speak at that time.
Okay.
So I apologize for that. Okay, so the question that I have, in the outline, you said that in the presentation, you said the outline of qualification plan. My understanding is that this outline is how you plan to the different units that you would teach the student. That is how you would lay out the qualification plan. Could there be a bit more transparency on that? I'm not quite sure of the outline of the qualification.
Sure. So I told you 2 ways in which you can represent that information. One, we have, if you're doing just the individual units, you can have the qualification plan, which is the first page that you see on your regional occupational standards that outlines all the mandatory or the core units. Have you ever seen that for the competency standards? When you print, if you print it or you download it, the first is just a 1-pager that gives you all the mandatory and core and the electives. Have you ever seen that?
Yes, I have seen it.
Or you can put that in the portfolio. You can put that in the portfolio. I'm saying in addition to that, the training delivery plan and assessment plan, your TDAP or your unit plan, that which you would have communicated. Remember I spoke about that it must be a contract between student or the candidate and the assessor, in terms of how you're going to be delivering the program and the time for the facilitation and time for the assessment. Have you ever, all right, have you ever done a TDAP or training delivery and assessment plan? Not the lesson plan, no. Hello?
Yes, are you speaking about the TDAC plan?
Yes.
Somewhat familiar with it, but not to an extent.
All right, so I can speak to you after, but I'm just sharing that once you've done that, and that has been communicated, that too can be placed in the portfolio. Because you would have shared that information with the students, you both have agreed. And so this is their plan, this is how they are going to, this is the sequence now, that tells this is the first set of units, then the next set of units, this is the evidence that you will place. If this is the first set of evidence that we place with all our task sheets or the assessment evidence, the feedback, the scores that you give them, the fact that you sign and date them and all of that. The sequence going right back to work experience, if you have do work experience or if they work. But I'm just sharing with you that is like the general info, part of the general information now before getting into the meat of the matter, which is the actual evidence of the assessment pieces, that you can put that before you go into that. So you can do the qualification plan, which is the first part, that first piece of your competency standard. Just give you the total number of units, and it tells you about the electives, and it tells you about nominal hours, and it tells you about it lists the units and the codes and the titles. That's what I'm talking about, and gives the hours, the range of hours that you can use. It can be less or more. All right, so that is what that is what I call the qual plan. That can be it, or you can use your TDAP, or you can use both. Are you clearer?
Nicole, is that good?
I'm not hearing Nicole again.
Yes. All right, so we've pretty much come to the end of the questions in the question and answer feature. And so I hand back over to you now, Mrs. Doman, to do our wrap up.
I don't know if you were finished in terms of the polling of the questions, but I'm going to go back now just to share with the colleagues the information relating to the contact details.
Okay, so we have one final poll left, and that's a session evaluation. So I'll launch it now while you go through.
Okay, thank you very much. So colleagues, we've come to the end of the question and answer session. Remember, you can email me, and I'm going to be sharing that in a while. And also, you can private message me as well. Now, we just need you to answer this if the webinar was interesting and useful, and if it will help you as you go along to implement the activities. Remember, we have training that we can do for institutions. Remember, we provide training for territories. And remember, we can provide further information on as to how we can facilitate. Remember, we can come into your territory and provide training for you. We can customize training. Person spoke about principal training. We can customize training. CXC is equipped to do all of that. All right. With that said, let me just share with you the contact details. We have a group of persons. We are directly relating to the curriculum and development. Mrs. Clacken's, I'm looking for Mrs. Clacken's name, I need to add it. But she can be reached as G. Clacken, GCLACKEN at cxc.org. And she's our instructional designer with responsibility for the Learning Institute. We have Mrs. Latoya Wedderburn Rose. She's responsible for curricula relating to science and math. She's responsible for the sciences. You have Linda Stewart Doman, that's Moa, that's me. I'm responsible for all the programs, the technical syllabuses, and I am primarily responsible for the CVQ implementation, product implementation. I am the auditor for pre-readiness audit activities, in training audits, and I also do support or examinations unit in the administration of training and assessment audits, which we're doing these webinars to support. I can be reached at eldoman@cxc.org. We have Claudia Jack, and Mrs. Claudia Jack is responsible for the business subjects as well as IT. We have Norlet Leslie Yard. She's responsible for all the communication, or what we call the social sciences at the council. So all these persons are managers, syllabus and curriculum development division. They're syllabus and curriculum development managers. And we have Miss Jodine Williams, who you would have heard from earlier this morning. I'm not sure if she's still here. She is our senior manager, syllabus and curriculum development. And I did tell you earlier about Mrs. Clacken, who's our instructional designer. Now, listening, as you would have heard, are part of the CXC team, we have Nicole Manning, and that's our Director of Operations. Her email is nmanning@cxc.org. We also have, or persons can write their emails in the chat. We have Tonya Motley. She is one of our exams manager, examination, development, and production. And she will have oversight for CVQ relating to training and assessment audits. And we have Michelle McCarthy, and she is responsible for the training and assessment audits. They are in Barbados, and she's responsible for the training and assessment audits for some territories. For SCD, we do the product implementation. So we offer the training, we offer the guidelines for implementation, and that is why I don't know if persons have a CVQ handbook. I would encourage you to download it from the website. We have it at the CXC, www.cxc.org, and that can further guide you in terms of a standardization for guidelines and requirements for CVQ implementation, colleagues. I urge you to read it. And just to let you know that we are willing to provide training through the Learning Institute as well as the on-site training delivery. And we would have been doing that for a number of our territories. So it's not anything new to you, colleagues. And of course, just to let you know that what I would have just shared is copyrighted, and so must not be reproduced without written consent. So if you are taking pictures or so while I was doing the presentation, it must not be reproduced, it must not be seen anywhere, because this is the work and intellectual property information for the council, which should not be recorded. For any mechanical, electrical use, including photocopying, any information storage and retrieval, colleagues, you can be held liable for same. So with that, colleagues, we would have come to the end of the first of our 3-day CVQ webinar series on the CVQ portfolio development process. Colleagues, you were a keen and receptive audience. And how do I know? From the number of questions that you have asked, means that you were quite receptive. And we want to use this opportunity to thank you wholeheartedly for participating, for being an engaged audience, and for asking questions for clarity and for further information, and for listening intently as to what was said. And we trust that you have learned, and that for some it was a reinforcement, and that it was informative, and that it was a rewarding experience, and that you will be using this information to further impact CVQ in your territories. We are happy that we could have provided this support, and we are most grateful, based on your responses, that you appreciated the webinar. For anybody who has any concern or issue, remember, you can private message me, as I told you, and you can email me as well. Yes, 3 days. Some persons are asking about 3 days. Yes, this first day is on the CVQ portfolio development process. You're most welcome, colleagues. I see the appreciation coming in. Thank you. You're most welcome. It's 3 days. So this is the portfolio development process. The second one will be the CVQ certification approach. And then the last day now, so I want you to invite all your students, because it's a students. You can come in too, but we're saying we want the students, because we want to go through the portfolio development tips and tell them what to expect during the portfolio and what should happen. So we want to go through all of that. So they will not get all of this information, because this is for you, but we want them to understand that this is what is expected of you. This is what we want you to do when you're doing this portfolio, and how you are to be prepared. So this what you've gotten is to guide them. What they will get on Wednesday is what they should do and what they should know. So you can be a part of that too, but invite as many of them, especially the ones that will be starting come September. And the ones who are in the progress. Very instructive presentation for them, a webinar facilitation. And so tomorrow now, yes, it will be 9 o'clock your time as well, colleagues. For persons in Jamaica, it is going to be 8 o'clock. I'm happy, colleagues. I see the resounding approval for having this webinar, and the council thanks you for that stamp of approval and for the confidence that you have placed in us to deliver this webinar session. We thank you. The time for the students again. Let me see what time for the students. But please remember to be here. But let me see the territories in the room. Jamaica, are you here? Trinidad and Tobago, are you here? Trinidad, Jamaica, 8 o'clock. Yes, Trinidad, are you here? Jamaica, Turks and Caicos. Barbados, are you here? Belize, are you here? Guyana, are you here? Antigua, are you here? Are we seeing the, I'm not seeing the British Virgin Islands. Yes, British Virgin Islands, are you here? St. Kitts, are you here? St. Vincent and the Grenadines, are you here? Dominica, are you here? So not seeing Barbados, St. Kitts, SVG, are you here? Great. Dominica, you're here. Barbados, you're here. Lovely. Are we seeing, so we see Dominica, St. Vincent. Okay, lovely, lovely. Guyana, oh, lovely. We're seeing representation. Of course, you must represent your territories. After all, you're all signatories. I'm looking for the Dutch territories. I'm not seeing them. I'm not seeing, I am not seeing Saba. I'm not seeing St. Eustatius. I'm not seeing St. Martin. I will check in with them in a while. I'm wondering if they were having difficulties. The information is recorded, colleagues. You will see it on CXC TV, because remember, we want all of our constituents now, all of our stakeholders to see what we have done here this morning. So it will be edited and formatted and appropriately stored and shared. Okay, so the CVQ portfolio development, which for the students, it starts at 4 o'clock, which is Eastern time. So it's 3 o'clock Jamaica time. Because we're saying they will be in classes as well to colleagues. So we were saying that, okay, let us give them some time and let their session be the last one, and we do it at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. So 3 o'clock Jamaica time, 4 o'clock Eastern time. The recordings will be accessed on the website, colleagues. No need to worry. You will have the information, because remember, we spoke about the copywriting, which is why I made sure to let you know that you may be in breach. So if one were to do anything, but it will be available. Yes, after the editing, colleagues. Yes, it will be available on the website. And so you are most welcome, colleagues. We are indeed grateful that you have benefited from this activity. That's what we wanted. We wanted the partnerships to be sustained, and we want the partnerships to be continued, and we want the partnerships to be for mutual benefit and for mutual success. And from all indications, based on your expressions and the information that you have shared in the poll, you have seen where the council is taking the time out to provide the necessary guidance. Seeing that we have a little lull, we're using the opportunity. We know, we understand the concerns, and we share the issues. We are demonstrating empathy, and we are also sharing that in this time, this is what we're asking you to do, so that even if you didn't know it before, even though we would have done all the other activities to secure implementation and enabling, we are now saying, yes, this downtime, let us use the time to get it right, everybody, and let us get on board as we certify our people to facilitate the free movement of skilled certified workers within the CSME, to develop in students the attributes of the ideal Caribbean person, to enhance the profile and the attractiveness of the CARICOM labor force, and of course, to harmonize our TVET systems across the region while we do that. Colleagues, it was my pleasure as the facilitator for this program. I look forward this session to tomorrow, when I will be coming to you live from the CXC Learning Institute virtually, as we discuss the CXC's approach to certification for 2020, and for Wednesday, the CVQ Portfolio Development Tips for our students. It was my absolute pleasure, and on behalf of the Council, we express our gratitude to you as our keen and receptive audience. Have a great rest of the day, and we look forward when next we meet tomorrow at 8 Eastern Caribbean time, Jamaica time, 8 and Eastern Caribbean time at 9 as we seek to continue our CVQ webinar series. Colleagues, I bid you goodbye. Continue to be safe and all the best. Until tomorrow, hasta la vista.
Have a good afternoon, colleagues.